for tuning in to Informed Life Radio on 1150 AM KKNW and streaming on CHD TV, Rumble, and other platforms. I'm your guest host, Lisa Templeton, and I'm pleased to introduce a pre-recorded conversation I had recently with Dylan Moore of the IRETA TV podcast, a show I follow and recommend. Although I've been aware of the risks of fluoride for some time, Dylan brought insights that were new even to me. With his background in chemical engineering, he explains what fluoride really is and isn't. He breaks down the distinction between natural fluoride and the industrial byproducts added to our water, including how those are produced. Since Dylan now lives in Japan, we recorded this interview in advance. This hour is brought to you by Informed Choice Washington. A heartfelt thanks to the listeners who support our efforts. We monitor legislation, educate the public, engage with policymakers, and protect our right to medical autonomy. Informed Life Radio is a value for value show. If you find this worthwhile, please consider pledging your financial support. Just $5 or $10 a month will help us immensely. We're a nonprofit with no corporate sponsors, and we put every dollar to careful use. Visit informedchoicewa.org and click Donate. We greatly appreciate your assistance. The views on this program may not reflect those of KKNW or CHD. This is not medical or legal advice. And with that, I would like to introduce Dylan Moore, and please enjoy the show. Welcome to an Informed Life Radio, Dylan.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming. I tracked you down in Japan, where you have moved your young family after I've been listening to your podcast, IRETA TV, for several years now. And you did a couple of episodes recently on fluoride.
Yes.
Specifically, you did one called What is Fluoride? And even though I've been in the fluoride fight for a few years now, I must say it's taken a backseat to vaccine advocacy for risk awareness. But you brought forth some information that I hadn't really heard before, and I thought our listeners would enjoy learning from you. So tell us a little bit about why you know so much about this.
Well, what's ironic is the reason I think maybe I know so much about it is because I was specifically not taught it. So I went to university at Western Washington University up in Bellingham, right? I majored in chemistry, and I've got a full Bachelor of Science in chemistry. And I remember specifically when I was taking my organic chemistry classes, this would have been the second year, we were discussing halides. Now, in organic chemistry, you're really working with, was it 5 or 6? It's sulfur, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, SNOPS for short. And you start to bring in the halides, which is chlorine, bromine, and iodine, and they have very similar chemical, we'll say reactivity, because their valence structures are all, it's not fair to say that they're the same, but they're close enough that you can see the similarities in them. And the way you see these valence structures that are similar is you look at the periodic table of elements and you look at the columns. Each column will generally have a similar chemical reactivity as you go up and down the column. Now, if you look at the periodic table of the elements, you'll notice that fluorine is in that column. So it actually goes fluorine, chlorine, iodine, bromine, iodine, and then I can never remember what's under iodine at the top of my head. AT. I can't even remember what it stands for. It's not something we learned about.
Yeah.
AT. Let me tell you that. But
I remember the halides from chemistry.
Yeah. So when we were learning about halides in the organic chemistry classes, we only learned about chlorine, bromine, and iodine. And I remember specifically my organic chemistry professor said, we are not going to teach you about fluorine because it is so unique that it has its own, we would have to do a complete section entirely just on fluorine because it has its own way of reacting with everything. And he said, unless you're going to go work for Teflon, you're probably not going to run into it. So we're just going to skip it. And that was the last thing I ever heard on fluorine in my chemistry classes. And I interacted with it a little bit in my brief time actually working in the chemistry field. I was a laboratory technician at one of the oil refineries up north in the state, and they used hydrofluoric acid as one of the catalysts to make a component of gasoline, and so that was kind of the first real experience for fluorine for me, because the hydrofluoric acid was so dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just off the charts dangerous in the sense that out in the unit that where they had the hydrofluoric acid, there was a line on the ground that if you cross this line, first without a permit, but secondary without what they called it a duck suit, which is like, just this full protective suit, you're fired. If you trip and your toe hits the other side of the line, you're fired. Like there was no joking around.
Yeah.
Like no exceptions. In order to cross that line, you must follow the protocols to protect yourself from hydrofluoric acid. And when they tested it, luckily I wasn't required to test it. Only the senior chemists were allowed to do that. There was an HF room, a hydrofluoric acid room, specifically dedicated to the hydrofluoric acid, where the chemist would have to completely suit up. And then when he dealt with the hydrofluoric acid, when he was done, there was a caustic bath, like of very, very high concentrated sodium hydroxide that he would soak every single component in, just to make sure that every last drip of hydrofluoric acid was neutralized. Because the rule of thumb I was told at the refinery is that any drop of hydrofluoric acid that gets on you. Now, keep in mind, this is like super concentrated 99.9% hydrofluoric acid, right? But any drop that gets on you, you have to amputate. And they told me that if you got about the size of a fist splashed on you anywhere, you're dead. And it's not because of the burn, and hydrofluoric acid is a strong acid, and it will burn you. But there's actually a chemical reaction that happens in the blood, and I might have this wrong. This is me trying to remember my work from 17 years ago, right? But if I remember correctly, that the hydrofluoric acid will actually react with the calcium in your blood, and because there's metabolic processes going on in your blood that require calcium, it does something like, very, very potent, like stopping your heart. Now, again, I might have the exact details of that wrong, but the detail I do have right, and I remember very specifically, is fist size splashing you, you're dead. Anything smaller, they have to amputate. Right? Wow. So that was my first experience, like face-to-face with
in real life
fluorine, right? And I was like, whoa, I didn't learn about this in school. This is some pretty wicked stuff, right? And then at some point, as I become, we'll call it more conspiratorial minded in the idea, fluorine came, the fluoridated water came in front of me, and I started poking around this fluoridated water and hearing the arguments from both sides, which is, it's good for your teeth. It makes strong, so we should just dump it in the water supply. And the arguments against it, which is like, it makes you dumb and lazy, and it calcifies your pineal gland, and it screws up your kidneys, your thyroid. It's like, okay, what's going on here? I ended up reading a book called The Fluoride Deception, and I wish I still had it. I know it's on a shelf in Vermont, because I'd spent some time traveling around the world, and I lived in Vermont for a while, and that's where I had the book. I read it like 15 years ago, but it was excellent, going over the actual history of why fluoride was added to the water. And if you've never heard of this, it has to do with the Manhattan Project.
Yes.
Which
I know this because I listen to your podcast. Yes.
Right. And talk about shock where you're like, that was not the answer that I was expecting to hear. Manhattan Project. What?
Right.
And I'll try to say this as concisely as I can, but the idea was, before fluoride was this magical medicine that you stuck in the water to help kids' teeth, it was well known as a poison and a toxin. And it's so reactive. This is why fluorine gets its own book on, here's fluorine chemistry that operates completely differently from everything else on the periodic table, is because fluorine is the most electronegative element in the universe. What does that mean? So if you look at a periodic table of the elements, And okay, we've got one pulled up here. This is an electronegativity chart, and I'm sorry you kind of have to zoom in, but it's color coded. If you're just listening to this, we got a periodic table, the elements pulled up. On the left side, you see more green, which is a low electronegativity, and in the top right corner, of which fluorine is in the most top right corner, if you ignore the noble gases, you see red. And then you get some yellow in the middle and some orange near the red and some lighter green near the dark green on the left side. So the electronegativity is essentially how badly that atom wants electrons. How much? Okay, if it's looking at electrons, how much it sucks those electrons close into it, and the more electronegativity, the more electronegative it is, the more viciously it's going to go after an electron in a chemical reaction. Well, fluorine
from another atom.
From another atom. Well, even its own. Like if you look at actual atom sizes, fluorine's tiny because it pulls. It doesn't. It's on the top, so it doesn't have as many electrons as one at the bottom. But comparatively speaking, it's tiny because it pulls all the electrons that it already has very, very close to itself. This is a side note. I'm going to bring up Isaac Asimov here in a second anyway on the history of fluorine, but this book is also on the shelf in Vermont. But Isaac Asimov wrote a book, I think it's just called Chemistry, where he has several small stories looking at the history of certain parts of the development of chemistry, and a lot of it is the discovery of different atoms throughout chemistry history. But he kind of, obviously he's a science fiction guy, he kind of looks at the science fiction angle of saying, okay, because fluorine is so small, it's actually almost as small as hydrogen, which is the first element. It's in terms of it's one proton and one electron. It's as small as you can get in terms of what it's made up of. But in terms of the space that it takes up, fluorine is similar. And he looks into, well, if life is based off of hydrocarbons because of the size of hydrogen, maybe theoretically you could have a life based off of fluorocarbons because fluorine is the same size, right? I mean, probably not, but it's a fun, science fiction thing to think about. But it's so reactive that this was the other story from the book on chemistry from Isaac Asimov. It was one of the last elements to be isolated and conclusively discovered because no one could isolate it, right? Everything that was already reacted with fluorine. Now, it's not impossible, but to find another element that exchanges itself and replaces the fluorine, you can't do it because fluorine is the strongest. And so what finally happened, if I'm remembering this correctly, which I think I am, the guy who discovered it, which I don't remember the name of, took hydrofluoric acid and separated the hydrogen from the fluorine with electrolysis. And when you do that, you get gas on one end and gas on the other. And what kept happening is he'd get the hydrogen gas on one end and nothing on the other end. And he's going, what's going on here? I'm confused. And what he figured out was that the fluorine, which in its natural state is two fluorine atoms connected together, so that's the fluorine molecule, elemental fluorine, is so viciously reactive, it'll just burn the air. It reacts with the air. So I know what to do. I'll pump out all the air. So he pumps out all the air, and the same thing happens. Because the fluorine was reacting with the glass.
The container, yeah.
And the way that he finally did it is he recognized that, okay, the only thing that fluorine doesn't seem to react with is something that has already reacted with fluorine. Okay. So I don't remember if he used the glass or some other thing, but he made a container that was already reacted with fluorine, and then he was finally able to isolate it and say, "Ha, we have discovered fluorine," and we could put it on the periodic table. But at this point in time, it was well known within the chemistry field. And this is 1878. I don't remember, 18 something, right? It was well known that if you play with fluorine, you might as well start knocking decades off your life expectancy.
Yeah.
Because this stuff is so toxic. Now, if you're not a chemistry person, but you've been paying attention closely to the words I'm using, I've been saying fluorine and not fluoride.
Yes.
So I want to be clear here, even after I spoke of how viciously electronegative and reactive fluorine is.
The element,
once it has reacted, it has lost that chemical fury. So if we take fluorine and we take sodium, for example, which is a metal, Similar to, sodium chloride is just table salt, right? If you took chlorine and sodium reacted together, you get table salt. You can take fluorine and sodium and react it together, and that's the stuff that's in your toothpaste and is good for your teeth or whatever. If you do that, sodium is very, very low on the electronegativity chart, and so it's got this extra electron that it kind of really doesn't care about. Anybody can have this. And then it bumps into fluorine that it's missing one electron in order to make its valence complete, and it viciously wants that electron, so they meet, and the fluorine takes the electron. And so what ends up happening is, instead of in an organic molecule, typically, it's not 100% like this, but typically the organic atoms, or the atoms in the organic molecule, more or less share their electrons. When you have a salt, which is an ionic compound, one side takes all the electrons in the reaction, not all the electrons, but takes the electrons that were part of the reaction, and one side has it and the other side doesn't. And so you get a very positive side and a very negative side, and this is why it dissolves in water, because the water, I don't want to get too complicated. It's got a more positive, more negative side, and it could just pop these two things apart and dissociate them. So on one hand, you have the positive sodium ion floating around because it's missing an electron, and you have the negative fluoride ion floating around because it has an extra electron. All right. So now the question becomes, if fluorine is so viciously dangerous it'll literally burn the air, right? What is I guess in the course of this conversation, what is the biological impact of the fluoride, right?
Yes.
And
so it could be called fluoride in a variety of different molecules, and we'll talk later about the hexafluorosilicic acid, right?
Well, and then I want to be clear, just for sake of speaking this correctly, if it's a fluoride, it's not a molecule. Molecules are organic. If it's a fluoride, it's a salt. Or maybe you can call it a compound, right? So I wanted to get back to the Manhattan Project. So I wanted to tell the kind of the discovery of fluorine as just to show kind of how wicked this thing is, and that, again, chemists who worked with fluorine back in the day, before safety was invented, that's what all our professors would laugh about. Back when I went to school, there was no such thing as safety in laboratory, right?
No air hoods or anything.
Well, I mean, they had air hoods, but I remember one. I didn't see this, but I had a classmate tell me this. One of the older chemists was walking through the hallway, looked into one of the laboratories and saw a beaker of something, stuck his finger in it, sniffed it, and went, "Oh, it's ether," and then kept walking. Right?
Oh, gosh.
I mean, violating every safety rule that they teach us. But I mean, he was from back in the day when he was like, "You think this is dangerous?"
Right. I remember in 7th grade, our teacher brought out a little container of mercury and let us just kind of play with it on the desk. We were rolling it around on the desk. We dumped it out of the container, and it really is fascinating and unlike anything else. But I just think, oh my gosh, we had no idea.
You just no cool. I mean, I have heard with mercury, unless you have a cut, you should be safe. But even then, it evaporates. You'll start breathing it. I wouldn't. Oh. Yeah. So, I wanted to make it clear that it was well known that fluoride was a poison. Fluorines and fluorides were poison. I mean, fluorine would burn you to death, but after you've reacted it, working with the fluorides was basically poison. Understood as poison. So we come to the Manhattan Project, where it's really, really important that we develop the biggest bomb ever to grace the imagination of mankind, so we can blow the people up. Okay, fine, right? Because we need to get it before the other people get it. And what's interesting about first of all, the Manhattan Project story is that of all the countries, I mean, you look at Russia, this is World War II era. Russia, Germany, and the United States, I think, were the big ones that were potential players to get a nuclear bomb. And it was found out after the fact that Germany and Russia, I mean, they had just completely written it off. So, there's no way we can make this thing. And the reason they said that there was no way that we can make this thing is because it wasn't a scientific thing. Everybody understood the science. You could do this. The problem was engineering, which they could say, how do you get enough uranium or plutonium in refined and purified enough in one spot to actually make enough for a bomb?
Okay.
And Germany and Russia had written that off, but it was the United States that said, we'll figure it out. And so the getting enough material was huge. And in order to have uranium for a bomb, there's uranium-238 and 235. Now, I can never remember which one's which, but I think you looked it up. Is it uranium-235 is the one you need for bomb, right?
Yes, I do believe so. I looked it up.
Okay,
too.
we'll go with that. If I'm wrong, sue me. I always get them backwards. So if 235 is the one you need for the bomb, something like 2% or 0.2%, I don't remember what the number is, of naturally occurring uranium is uranium-235, and the rest of it is uranium-238. So when you get if you've got a chunk of uranium in your hand and you're getting fried by radioactivity, and you're looking at it, it is mostly not good for a bomb. Like 99% or whatever, right? So you have to separate it. And what they figured out the best way to do that is you react the uranium with fluorine. You get uranium hexafluoride. So that's uranium with 6 fluorides around it. Apparently, you can then boil it. You don't turn it into a gas. Once it's a gas, you can stick it in a centrifuge with some sort of permeable membrane. Mm-hmm. And because the uranium-238 is just a little bit more massive than the uranium-235, the 235 is going to go through that membrane a little bit faster, and you can start to separate these two things. Okay. And if you've seen the movie Oppenheimer, which I don't think was that great, but I thought this was an interesting point, that there's part of the movie where after they've set up in Los Alamos, every day or every week or whatever it is, Oppenheimer goes to the front and he pulls out a marble and he puts it in what looks like a big fish bowl, and he says, "This is how much more." I think it was plutonium, but it's same level of difficulty to make the plutonium. Here's how much more we got. One more marble. Here's how much more we got. And then they needed like this softball size amount of plutonium or uranium in order to make the bomb. So that's how slow and arduous it was to make this stuff. And so in order to do it, they needed massive amounts of fluorine, and they needed to make it in fluorine factories. Now, in the fluorine factories, they were you can imagine chemical factories in the 40s, like, before they invented safety. Mm-hmm. I can't even imagine how horrible it must have been to work in one of those places. All these people were fluorine, fluoride, whatever. They were getting exposed to it, and they were just falling apart. Their bones would cripple up, and they get poisoned and die. And even beyond that, of course, there's waste product that comes out of these factories. It's poisoning all the surrounding typically farmland. And if I remember the fluorine deception correctly, because he details all this, the workers and the farmers started suing because they're like, "Hey, you've done damage." And the government, and I probably have this wrong, but my imaginative memory says that certain generals were the ones freaking out, going, "If we keep getting sued, the fluorine factories could get shut down, and if the fluorine factories get shut down, we can kiss the Manhattan Project goodbye." And so, this is where it just gets comical. They go to the guy who literally wrote the book Propaganda, Edward Bernays, the cousin of Sigmund Freud, and they go, "What do we do?" And somehow Sigmund Freud gets a hold of the fact that once upon a time, this is back in the 20s or back in the 30s, back before World War II, there was some traveling dentist who went around to rural areas in Western United States, and checking out their teeth and also looking at the mineral concentrations in the water. And he found one community that had a high fluoride, natural occurring fluoride concentration in the water, and they had unusually strong teeth, although it was discolored because fluoride will discolor your teeth. Mm-hmm. And makes this observation. Now, that's a legitimate observation, and I would say that is a legitimate reason to create a hypothesis that says, hey, maybe fluoride benefits your teeth. That is a valid hypothesis worth investigating based on what this guy found, right? And they just took that and ran with it, and came out with this thing of, fluoride's good for your teeth, and we're going to add it to the public water supply. And Bernays came up with this, so now they can transform the this poison basically into medicine, and then they couldn't get sued. The idea was so they couldn't get sued for it anymore.
Yeah. Did it help? Do you know with the lawsuits? Did it deter further ones, or just it kind of tainted the jury?
Please go and read the book. I haven't read it in 15 years.
By the way,
I'm
it's by
impressed with myself remembering what I remember.
No, I was amazed you remembered as much as you did. It's by Christopher Bryson, Bryson, The Fluoride Deception.
Yeah. So now what's even more interesting about this is that there are other industries that have natural fluoride waste. Aluminum smelting, the steel industry, and the phosphate fertilizer industry are the main ones I understand. I remember Monsanto being on that list in the book, and I don't remember why, but I was like, oh, big surprise there.
The usual suspects.
The usual suspect. But fluorine, in terms of an industrial component, I mean, we already saw that how useful it is in refining uranium, but also in terms of reducing the temperature at which metals will smelt at. So back to antiquity, as far as I understand, it was found out that if you're smelting iron, that if you take calcium fluoride, it's a very pretty rock. It has all these great colors if you look at it. Calcium fluoride, if you stick that in with the ore that's getting smelted, you can smelt it at a lower temperature. This is why fluorine got the name that it did, because it comes from the Latin word fluo, which means to flow. Okay, it helps the metal flow. Well, it's the same thing in the aluminum refining process, because aluminum smelting, you need an incredible amount of electricity for, because you got to have this like just insane voltage in order to make it happen. And any little help to make it flow a little easier is great from an industrial perspective, but you end up with all these fluoride compounds as a byproduct. And so the claim made in the book, and this is what I'm really, really curious about, especially now we're seeing like Utah has banned fluoride, and these communities are doing it. Florida's attempting to do it, and so on. I am very curious as the purity of what is being stuck in the water, what the source is, right?
Yes.
As the claim is, it's this straight industrial waste that's getting pumped off, mainly from the phosphate fertilizer industry, because they're basically digging rocks, and you get what you get when you dig rocks, and it includes fluorides. That if they're just literally selling off this chemical byproduct waste, which normally they'd have to spend $1 million to get rid of, it now gets converted into medicine, and they could sell it as a product to a local municipality or a local county that will then dump it into the water. Those companies are like, hey, that's good for us because we're amoral and soulless. Haha, right? So does are there other impurities in the fluoride? Right? Is it a chemical soup? I mean, the claim is it contains stuff like lead. It contains stuff like cadmium. It contains stuff like arsenic. I mean, maybe there's who knows what's in it? If you're just like, if it's just slag from an industrial process, not technically slag, but you get my point. Because at that point, it kind of becomes moot whether or not the fluoride is good for you, because you're adding all this stuff that we know isn't good for you. And this conversation, I mean, the reason I started did the show on fluoride is it was brought up by my cohort at iRead TV. His name's Nima. You'll see him on occasion on shows, particularly when we do economic stuff. He lives in Miami-Dade, and Miami-Dade voted to get the fluoride out 8-2 in the city council, and the mayor vetoed it. And I was like, how does the mayor veto an 8-2? He goes, according to Miami-Dade, you have to have 9-1 to override a veto. And I'm going, I have never heard of that. Wow. But that caused me to look into it, and I brought this question up of, okay, I've heard this claim that it's just direct waste. And I'm like, do you have to do like a Freedom of Information Act or whatever, or a request for information to get this? And Nima
to find out what the substance is that they're adding.
Well, I wish I had it ready. I'm not going to take the time to find it right now. Nima found it. It was public information. Boom. Here was the government contract for the order for the hydrofluorosilicic acid from a chemical company in Washington.
Right.
like in Tacoma or Federal Way or whatever. I don't
yeah.
What the name of it is. And so now my question would be, where did they source that fluoride? And
that hexafluorosilicic acid.
Yes. Or hydrofluorosilicic acid. I guess it's two words for the same compound. Where did they source it? And if it was impure, did they refine it appropriately? Right? Because if they didn't, then there's a whole chemical nastiness of soup that's being added to the water. And what my idea is because, I mean, we can get into the noble line. I don't know how much time we got left here, but there's the mainstream, in quotes, mainstream talking point is the fluoride is good for your teeth. The science is settled. And if you deny it, you're a quack, you're a charlatan, you're a swanker, right? Mm-hmm. You're nuts. Mm-hmm. And we live in a world where, I mean, you like the fluoride deception. I mean, if I remember correctly, the guy had like 50 pages or 100 pages of citations for his bibliography at the end of the book of just how well sourced this book was. You can come up with study after citation, after fact, after whatever. And then the people in charge are just like, we don't care.
Yeah. This brings to mind, you pointed out the mayor of Miami-Dade in her speech stating that she was going to veto the city council's vote. She said, I don't take this decision lightly, and I've talked to many parents and grandparents, and most importantly, experts about this.
Right. So you're instead of talking to the people who are actually receiving the so-called medicine and getting their informed consent. Oh yeah, informed. It's like it's written on the top of the screen right now. Informed consent. Strange idea, but maybe we can flesh that idea out at some point in the future. But for right now, nobody understands what that means. So instead of going to the people who are being given the medicine against their will, and without informed consent, you went to the experts who probably came from the organizations that were created in the wake of this Manhattan Project propaganda campaign. I mean, that was one where I wish I had the book and the fluoride deception in front of me still. I mean, I know I could go buy the thing again, but there's 4 million books I could buy right now. Give me a break, right? You can't read all the books.
I know.
Because I have a feeling that the organizations these so-called experts belong to were probably created in the wake of this propaganda campaign for the Manhattan Project. Like, oh yeah, the experts, the people who are totally trustworthy, who always tell us the truth all the time. Right. So when, and this gets into the systematic politics, which might be a new concept for your listeners, and is something that we talk about regularly on my show, is that systematic politics is aimed much more at looking at how the system functions, the system of government functions versus whoever at this moment is running that system. And whether it's team blue, team red, team left, team right, team up, team down, whatever, right? That the real power brokers really in the world, but we'll focus on the United States right now. They control both sides. Not that, I mean, there's blackmail and bribes and all that sort of stuff at the higher levels, but that's not the main driver. The main driver is who writes policy. And the majority, if not all, of policy fundamentally comes from, I hope I get this right. Is it the Social Science Research Institute? Social Science Research. Oh, I forgot it. It's like, I think it's in Illinois or it's in Ohio, where you've got these maybe 70 sociology PhDs that sit and write policy, and they're able to disseminate it through the rest of the country by associations. You probably never heard of these associations. Have you ever heard of the National Governors Association? We're talking in Washington. Have you heard of the Washington State Association of County Auditors, the Washington State Association of County Assessors, the Washington State Association of Sheriffs, the association is this, association of that, the Washington State Association of Municipalities, Washington Association of Counties. These things, now that I've told you, you'll probably start seeing these things everywhere. Yeah. And there are these, in quotes, private organizations where all the public officials come to meet. And because most of these guys are dumb as a box of rocks, they don't understand how policy works. And I mean, on one hand, I don't criticize them for it, because policy can be complicated on everything, making sure that it works right and it's legal and it makes sense and it's actually doing what you wanted to do. So most of these guys who get into these elected positions, they don't know what they're doing, and they run to the nearest association for their policy. Case in point, the Municipal Research and Science and Research Project. Hold on. This is important for Washington. Municipal Science and Research. Okay. I always get the S and the R backwards. Hold on. MSRC. Nope, got it backwards. That's the Marine Spill Response Corporation. MRSC. All
Well,
right.
while you're looking that up, I'll just point out what we in the vaccine risk awareness movement have discovered. When you start, we've discovered all sorts of similar organizations like AIM, Association of Immunization Managers, most
Yeah.
of the there's NACHO, which I can't even remember what that stands for. But on our last session, not the one we just finished up, but the one before that, one of the bills that Informed Choice Washington ran in Olympia was included that members of these organizations cannot, these organizations are funded and sponsored by the pharmaceutical companies. You can just go look at the About tab and see Pfizer and
yeah. I mean,
Moderna
they're
and
honest
everybody.
about it right there.
Yeah. It's just all right there. That those policymakers could not hold membership in those organizations that profit from the promotion of the products that these companies produce.
Right.
So
right,
yeah.
and I'm sure that bill was dead in the water as soon as it touched it.
Right. Yeah. It didn't even get a hearing, but.
Yep. So I found this website. It's mrsc.org, the Municipal Research and Services Center. This is specifically for Washington State, specifically to help cities. And what this does is they have policy ready for you. And it doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum, because you get in there and you're just like, okay, we have a 10-year zoning plan to figure out. And you're like, I don't know how to do a 10-year zoning plan, like whatever. So everybody goes and runs to the MRSC to be like, help me, I don't know what to do. Right. And I can confirm this because in one of the systematic politics teams we have, there's a city councilman. I won't say what city it is for the sake of this show, but he's like, that's absolutely what everybody else on the council does. They just go screaming and running for the MRSC because they're like, tell us what to do. We don't know how to do this. Sure. Right. And that's how the real control mechanism happens. Yeah. And the trick is when you approach the policymakers, first and foremost, you have to understand what the noble lie is. And I mean, there's a noble lie everywhere. There's a noble lie about the vaccines, the climate change, and the fluoride, and whatever, right? There's a noble lie everywhere for all components of the craziness that we live in, right? But right now, we're specifically talking about fluoride. The noble lie is it's good for your teeth. It's a medicine. Period. Right? And if you come up and directly challenge that, I mean, what is it? Neuro-linguistic programs, maybe something like this, where if the people who have been trained this way, because remember, they went to special schools for this sort of stuff. They went to Harvard or Yale for city man, what do they call it? Civic development, city plan, something like that. Whatever it is, and they get indoctrinated in the university system to think like this, where there's certain words. If you say the wrong word, you're just done. You're just completely done. I mean, for example, after the 2020 election, when we had all this, the most secure election in history, and here's noble lie stuff, and anybody who questioned it was now an election denier. So if you said the word election integrity, the crazies, the zombies, were programmed to say, "Oh, this is an election denier."
Yeah.
There's certain words that flare them off, and then there's certain words that get them excited. Oh, diversity, equity, inclusion. We're working toward, who are the stakeholders? We need to impress. Like, they have their own language that if you use that language, they like you. And if you use the language that has been identified that goes against the noble lie, they don't. So if you can utilize the language and come with the policy, write up the policy and say, hey, I'm looking at this issue. And let's say for fluoride, here was my idea. I know the long-winded approach to get to my idea. And this is predicated on the fact that what's actually getting delivered to the cities and counties is chemical slop as opposed to refined hydrofluorosilicic acid. So instead of arguing over whether or not fluoride is good or bad, because you're going to lose that argument, right? Go toward fluoride is great. It is the most amazing thing in the world. But we just want to make sure that we're getting the best quality fluoride. So here, policymaker, would you pass this into law or ordinance or whatever that says we need this level of testing on our fluoride to make sure that it's the appropriate purity? And if it's true that the stuff is chemical slop, it's going to come back and, oh, it's full of lead and mercury and arsenic and cadmium and all this sort of stuff. Now there is a policymaker dilemma.
Yeah.
But between the people making the decisions, because I mean that's a real problem. That's not a part of there's no part of the noble lie that says, oh, lead is good for you and you should be drinking mercury, right? So now instead of it being the policymakers against the people having to drink the Kool-Aid, right? Being forced to drink Kool-Aid, it's now the policymakers against the policymakers going, well, but it's not pure. What do we do? Right? And then now you can move the conversation back against them, and you never tripped over the mine of the noble lie. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I like how you said earlier in your show that you don't want to activate their usual defenses. But yes. I still keep going around and around. Like I wouldn't, have been testifying before Board of Health, for instance, about fluoride dangers and risks and informed consent, and then suddenly come back, and I wouldn't anyway, to say, yay, fluoride, let's just make sure it's the purest. So I'm still trying to figure out what I would say at this point. Now our plan is out.
And then if you want to learn how to do this, like you really have to get training from the Center for Self-Governance. There is a complete mind shift that needs to happen in order to be successful with this sort of thing. And I have not communicated what that mind shift is here. And most people who take the training usually don't end up getting it. They go back into partisan politics where they go, I need my guy to win, or I got to win at my issue, or whatever, where if you could really boil it down to the system and really get your emotions out of it. Because my emotions say, I want to jump up and down and get this poison the F out of my water. You're poisoning me. How dare you? Right? Like you should be in jail for doing this to me based on right. That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Right. But if you can put that away, because the way that the whole system is set up is to catch you, because once you do that, they can identify you as the quack. Right. Just like when all these parents started going to these school board meetings, jumping up and down about, their daughters getting raped in the girls' bathroom by boys dressing up as girls or whatever. And then the next day they're getting reported as domestic terrorists by the National School Board Association to the Department of Justice. And everyone's going, what?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that the federal definition for domestic terrorist is, or not is, but includes, it's a little longer than this, includes if you appear to intend to intimidate a governing body. Appear to intend to intimidate. So the guy who had his daughter raped goes into the school board meeting, gets mad and starts yelling. Well, he appears to be intending to intimidate a governing body. That checks off the definition. Right? And so now was that righteous anger, and did the school board, in quotes, deserve it? Maybe. Did it accomplish anything productive? No, it backfired.
Right.
Because we're well-studied organisms. Humans are. They know typically how we're going to react emotionally, and they know that if we do these things to them, they're going to have this reaction to it. So we need to be sure that we can catch that reaction. That's exactly what J6 was all about. Right? We know we stole the election. They're going to be pissed off. So let's all funnel them and then have all this big story ready with, how many FBI and federal guys in there making sure that, encouraging people to break stuff and get into the building. And the noble lie story on J6 is just so ridiculous. Right? It was a honeypot. Because the goal was at the federal level, we want to push this domestic terrorism thing, because the missing component, and I know I'm getting off on fluoride, but this is relevant on understanding the systematic politics thing. The missing component between the being able to label somebody a domestic terrorist and charge somebody as a domestic terrorist. In order to label somebody, you just need to do what I said before. In order to charge them, there has to be a connection to an international organization. And that's why none of these J6ers could be charged with anything, because there was no connection to an international organization. That's like the golden cup at the federal level for the people who want to, I guess, annihilate us, right? Is if they can get the international charge requirement removed from the ability to charge somebody with domestic terrorism. Now they can just start pointing at anybody because you appear to be you appear to be intending to intimidate a governing body. I mean, that's subjective. Anybody could be doing it at any given. Anybody can be accused of doing it at any given moment. You can't prove otherwise, right? That's a systematic issue, and the idea of, well, I'm going to go jump up and down in front of the school board. That's your emotional reaction. That's your reaction to self-preservation, to defend yourself and your family. And it's being used against you.
Right.
You have to be able to take a step back. Let me give another example. So I did a show critiquing this, was another jumping up and down in front of the school board, not as dramatically as his father, who obviously had a reason to be dramatic about it. But in California, some parents found out that there were secret rainbow clubs in the elementary school, which is like hardly surprising at this point. And that when the parents found out about it and they wanted it to stop, a flyer got passed around the school saying, here's how the teachers need to talk to parents about these rainbow clubs in order to continue the rainbow clubs. And it was, 3 or 4 people in a row talking to the school board about how this needs to be changed. Well, I took a moment. I looked up the state law in California. The state law in California says that students have the right to LGBTQ information, and any attempt to prevent them from accessing that information is considered an act of censorship by the state of California. So all those people going and talking to the school board, they're barking up the wrong tree. School board has their hands tied behind the back by state law, even if they wanted to change it, right? State law trumps, school board ordinance. I don't even know what the policy. I don't even know what they call it, right? And I mean, it feels good to watch. It feels good to be like, oh, look at this guy jumping up and down and telling them, the way that it is, and it's making them look bad on social media, but it does nothing, right? It does nothing except expose you to the people, to the policymakers going, we got another quack. We got another crazy one right here. Here's a person that we could ignore, right? So bringing it back to fluoride again, this is just my idea, and it's predicated on the fact that there is no refining process happening to purify this hydrofluorosilicic acid, which is not to question the validity of the fluoride being bad for you, but to say, oh, it's great, but let's just make sure it's pure enough. And if it's not, now we have another reason to get it out of the water, and we never had to step in that explosive landmine of the noble lie, right? Yeah. Now, I do want to put an asterisk on this, is that in this particular avenue, the battle against the noble lie does appear to be working. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gotten passed at Utah level. It wouldn't have appeared. It appears to be in the process of getting passed in Florida, and I'm reading all the time about new municipalities taking it out of the water. So there is progress fighting the noble lie on this. But I mean, let's say you're in, I don't know, Bellevue or something, right? Maybe this is a good thing to try. You mentioned your dentist friend. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, Dr. Bill Osmundson, who's been really
do you think
vocal.
If he went to, I'm just hypothesizing here, if he went to the city council and he was like, fluoride's great or whatever, let's just make sure that it's at the right level of purity, do you think he might get the council's ear for something like that? And I mean, that's not something anybody needs to argue about. It's like, yeah, we should test this and make sure that it's pure. Like, what's there to argue about, right? And if it comes back negative, gotcha.
I'm just still trying to figure out how I asked for the test without declaring we love this stuff.
I don't know if I'd call that a rant, but I'll stop ranting for a moment and let you get a breath. Okay,
Dylan, you mentioned to us centerforselfgovernance.com, and I know that the president and co-founder of that is Mark Herr, Herr, and I've heard so much about that organization over the years, including on your podcast, and I had the pleasure of meeting him and his wife several weeks ago and got to take a short training from him. And so I would ask our listeners to go to centerforselfgovernance.com to get more information about having this frame of mind for approaching.
Also, sorry to interrupt you. One thing to be clear, if you're serious about wanting to learn how to do this sort of stuff, and it's serious stuff, if I remember correctly, the Utah fluoride bill that got passed actually originated from a Center for Self-Governance team.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is being able to move big pieces in a big way,
Wow.
with minimal effort. I mean, I shouldn't say minimal effort. I mean, comparing to the effort of like Bill Gates, who has $40 million and spends it on everything, versus someone who's basically does this as a part-time hobby because they have a full-time job and 3 kids, right?
Yeah.
That's what I mean by minimal effort.
Is that you?
I wouldn't describe myself as having a part-time job. So I'm a business owner. So the what I was going to say is, yes, if you go on there, do not just look at here are the classes that are on the schedule. Contact them, and they will put a class on the schedule for you.
For your group.
Or for whatever. Get in contact them, because so many people that go on the website and they say, well, there's nothing in my area. Well, the reason those things got on the website is because people called them and said, hey, I want one in my area, and then they put it on the schedule. Although that being said, it's kind of a self-filtering test. If you can't come up with the gumption to call them and request some information about having a class, you're probably not going to have the gumption to call your policymakers. So
to follow through. Okay. Good advice. Good advice.
Yes.
Tell our listeners a little bit about you and your show. Maybe I should have asked this up at the top, but
sure. So my show is Irita TV. You can find us at irita.tv. We're on X, we're on YouTube, we're on Rumble, we're on BitChute and Odyssey. And the show is I'm the main face on the show, but we have a cohort, Nima Major, who's he's somewhere on the spectrum of economic expert. And our initial show conversation was actually about economics. And if you're listening to this, you probably just by statistical reasoning have a theory on economics that is quite different from what we would be espousing. And I would encourage you to come listen to us, and you'll probably get angry at first, and then once you realize that we're accurate, you'll see the economic world in a whole new light. But we like to talk about economics. We like to talk about history, and specifically history, looking at it in systems. We really focus on Carol Quigley's historical analysis technique, which is not found in Tragedy and Hope. You have to read another book of his called The Evolution of Civilizations. I think Evolution of Civilization is even better than Tragedy and Hope. So if you're a Carol Quigley reader and you're like, Tragedy and Hope's great, go get Evolution of Civilizations. Awesome book. Basically, how do you take an executive approach to history as someone who makes decisions within history, as opposed to the clerical approach, which is you're just recording dates and names and data. One of my pet subjects is intellectual self-defense, how to defend yourself intellectually, and what that means. I have a 3-part series. I have a 3-part series on that, which I can only highly recommend as much as I can. And then, occasionally we'll talk about stuff like science or religious topics, spiritual things, and systematic politics, of course, is a big one. But my goal is always to give the listener, instead of just, let me just pick on people for picking on people. You listen to someone like Tim Pool, or you listen to someone like Dave Rubin or something like that, and you get a lot of stuff to be, or even Alex Jones, you get a lot of stuff to be like emotionally excited about, but at the end of it, you're just like, what do I do? I always want to give someone something where we can say, here's what you can do. Actionable. It might not be easy.
Yeah.
But I want to give you something actionable that has been shown to give results. So
okay, Nathan's saying our time is up. Dylan, thank you so much for all your time and effort. This was fantastic. And you've listened to an Informed Life Radio on KKNW. And thanks, ladies and gentlemen.